men la gani adayo mi sanje chuda toji chona lo janju badu dani jaso dagi chijin jivi sananje ndola benje sanje ru shu sanje chuda toji chona lo janju badu dani jaso dagi chijin jivi sananje ndola benje yenduwa shu sanje chuda toji chona lo janju badu dani jaso dagi chijin jivi sananje ndola benje ruwa shu sataname midam ji omboda jeje la so jeje la shawa shawa na sanje sona halu chijin dewe teda jeje dembe shin de de jeje dewe jeje de rinje sa yo de je tenjin jeba de la chalo de je ko wa yin de la be je shin sa sun se me ambitane de ba to la to ba sen namu la ye ga da lu dan ne jin ga zhu bon da da me ga nan da ro kun je da na che sa tham je ge do da ge che de do kang ge de yin zhe wa jong ga ba me ba je me ba che ba me ba da me wa me ba zhe me ba ta de tin me tin ji me zhe wa ni xi xi dan ba zo ye san jia ma na tam ba de la cha cha lo la so ta la ma chi be na la kun de ra xin du zhen me ba ta yun zhe den zhe lu wa me ba ni pen zhen ga me chuo su xia wa yi lu zhu guang zhen do wa qin ji lo chen ni da su wa na xi chen de ra da ka sa kan yu ga me chuo na xi kun de ra xin du zhen me ba si ga la ani ko wa da nyang a len da wa de ani den jin zhe wa qin me da la den ne ani ra xi me ba da la den la pa bi对不对？ani kun de ra xi me ba ne wa zang kun de ra xi me ba jiao tu de zang ba yang ani ko dang kun de ni wo de be den ne me ba ma yin ba o ra xi ji dong yang ani tan ye dam du ani kun ju bi ren ba dang kun do bi ren ba是吧？这个俺你看说的就没得过，现在让钱都在买巴掌，军队电子路啊买巴，你谁干了？军队看就别人别往出去别，俺你他就买这个巴掌，俺你的来了的呢，俺你他看说的有这个电子现在了的呢，俺你3000年就碰不出来，看就别人别往个军队交通的。말이 반도베 아니 내도베 아니 시신에 아니 거에 저밥에 타바사에 저토야기 오텐라베 관대라신 두산 매바다 균대된지 루안 매바 이 편진감에 직접 못도 봐 많이 봐 아니 직접서 직송아 송아 기라 편진감에 초수 차와이 아니 우르비아서 저 공부도 하시고 이 친구들 소 전에다 됐어요 말이에요.
So, as it says in the Lama Chiba, this verse which says, Samsara and Nirvana lack even an atom of true existence, while cause and effect and dependent arising are unfailing. We seek your blessings to discern the import of Nagarjuna's thought, which is that these two are complementary and not contradictory. So, based upon the reasoning or the sign of dependent origination, one comes to recognize that there isn't even an atom of true existence in all of samsara and nirvana. But even though that is the case, this is not saying that all of this is totally non-existent, but rather, conventionally speaking, the cause and effect, the stages of our engaging in samsara or cycling in samsara, and the stages of reversing that, those causes and effects are unfailing. Conventionally speaking, they are existent, and so this doesn't fall into an extreme of nihilism. But so due to the cause of having ignorance and then creating karma, we have to take up these contaminated aggregates. That process of cause and effect effect is unfailing. And so as long as we have that ignorance, then we will continue to cycle in samsara. And similarly, if you remove that cause of ignorance, one is able to be freed from this cycle of samsara. So due to removing the cause, then one can actually reverse that process and can achieve a liberation from samsara. Now, there are some individuals that struggle to posit both of these things, that all phenomena lack some kind of intrinsic existence, they lack true existence, and then at the same time that cause and effect are unfailing. So here it says again, we seek your blessings to discern the import of Nagarjuna's thought, which is that these two are complementary and not contradictory. So this lack of intrinsic existence and the infallibility of cause and effect actually are mutually reinforcing. You haven't gotten to a situation where you aren't able to posit one or posit both of them in relation to one basis. You don't come to see them as contradictory, but rather these two ideas support each other, these two understandings. So here, this verse is then asking, like we see in the praise of dependent origination, to properly understand Nagarjuna's thought that these two understandings are contradictory, not or complementary, not contradictory.
Oh yeah, that tender anuluji yase jayu gomba chishin lulu ki tawa ki anida tomba tenjungu ten la pane ani chomden deji la tomba tenjungu kone as maman dame be kone tomba tenjungu kone ani ga si be kone ani chomden de la toba jaya ke tande toba se de tin da shelun do du puya kinane ta khasa yanje subject la 希望罗兰年纪为出的天才话去，再把滚了，刚才再把滚了，就可能再把孙子天年纪开话也给了3节9天去，现在他看上清白吧，3节几再把滚进来呢？ 아니, 어가서 숨기자바데 초래, 초인라, 숨기자비 초대양, 아니 땡중 숨바 대이 임비 시동바 땡중 근저 숨바 대이 임비시 균전 대체나 아니 어쩜된 데지 알룬도 저와자비 룰루테 바서 룬도지 템바기 짐바기 아니 개와 남지 땡중 숨비권 숨바 딜라테네 아니 좀된 데지 거든 제수 참고 저래 산제 제수 참고
No. So, just as Nagarjuna and his spiritual sons realized this situation, they saw directly this truth based upon dependent origination, that all things lack true existence. So, Je Lama Tsongkhapa himself, coming to see this way, this tradition of Nagarjuna and his spiritual sons, then praises the Buddha for his teaching on dependent origination, which is the text we're working with now. And yesterday we had arrived at the point, we had gone through verse 52, but here to go through this again, the fourth point at the top of 63 in the Tibetan is the way in which the Buddha gives rise to love for sentient beings, or has love for sentient beings. And so here this verse reads that of all your deeds, your speech is supreme. Within that too, it is this very speech. So the wise should remember the Buddha through this teaching of dependent origination. So here, among all of the deeds of the Buddha, the speech, the teachings of the Buddha are the supreme deed. And based upon, within the speech of the Buddha, this very speech, this teaching of dependent origination is the supreme kind of teaching, the supreme teaching that the Buddha gave. And so recalling that, thinking about that, one recalls the kindness of the Buddha, reflects on the kindness of the Buddha.
아니 누자남 코와당 연보다 시지지발라 초비치도 승바인바인팀배 단죄례자最라 차비치 만세 남로치나 세조발라 차비치 맞아봐가 남로치나 티니된 세가라 연보다 시지지발라 남바 초비치도 아니다 태권한이 된바래
So, among all of the deeds of the Buddha, his speech, his teaching is the supreme kind of activity. And among all of the speech of the Buddha, this teaching of dependent origination is considered to be the supreme teaching. So, this idea is also expressed in Chandrakirti's Entry to the Middle Way, where he has a verse explaining that the Buddha did not teach this dependent origination and emptiness for the purpose of quelling others in debate, of overcoming debate opponents. It wasn't out of some kind of attachment to debate and winning debates that the Buddha taught this path, but rather it was for the sake of freeing sentient beings from their afflictive emotions and obscurations to omniscience. So it is for that purpose of helping sentient beings to overcome their own afflictive emotions and ultimately the obscurations to omniscience that he presented this teaching of dependent origination. So here it's not for the purpose of just engaging in some kind of debate or winning in debate, but rather in order to benefit sentient beings that the Buddha taught this.
가데팅이 남바시아바나 신신지부를 교장녀와매 가데팅이서 동바된중 우주고 옆사지 때나 밥에 아니 동바된중 그天당 된주 동비天등이 아니 시바나 아니 다 가서래 란지바 men제 그 대박이 아니 흉 대다가 녀와대 밤에 신신 대다기 된대다 아니 지바 줘봐 뭐냐 마인바 어때다라 가봐 치나야 아니 녀와 요 말이 신신 지바 주나 녀와 매 야 신신 지바 주자 녀마 매 흉신
No.
先去熊，路边赛季东把电中给天当，按到电就东北天给天你的电了爸爸呢，俺那卡说的东把电中给天都没得吧。然后就按那卡说的出发单，遇见了就然后俺个产业就遇见了叫我得把他说话给，他我我个兄弟忙不起来的吧？那个兄弟他个俺那兄弟他基本的去那样要嘛的，兄弟他当干那要嘛的。
So, if you come to properly understand this teaching that emptiness it means dependent origination, and dependent origination is the meaning of emptiness. Here, so we see in the lower sort of texts of those of the autonomists and below that they assert other things. So they assert that things are inherently existent or exist by means of their own characteristics. And that isn't the actual situation, the actual way that things are. And so when one progresses to the sort of final understanding, one comes to see that these texts are not presenting the sort of actual way that things are. But that doesn't mean that there is some sort of contradiction in their teaching that. But they don't present the way that things actually are, the final sort of meaning of emptiness and dependent origination.
야, 다 뒤집어지자. 다 뒤지라. 아니, 된지지에서 라도 총주대 개외송나 장바 민매신. 나저 저러 제비 개노제 차선 첨부텔라 대다 그 세대다 대말에. 아니, 돈반냐면 샤자생기 지에서 안장고나마 정어 제라도 총화 주대. 아니, 라도 손에 개외송 아니 데니스음 수림지 라와당 딩의지 라와당 셰르지 라와서 뭐 제지做切바기 오다 데니스음라 장바 매매신 아니 사와당 자지위 실라 송로지위 아니 난조라 장바 제바기 세오 아니 게노로산 잡아 셰차와 시기 장선 첨부 아니 좀 된대라 대라 대다도 그와 계속 사실 전부터 대다 야.
No. So, here then, in the next verse, which follows this, it says, this is verse 53, following such a teacher and having become a renunciate, having studied the conqueror's words not too poorly, this monk who strives in the yogic practices, such is the depth of his reverence to the great seer. So here, Je Lama Tsongkhapa himself became a renunciate, became ordained in this tradition of the Buddha, and having studied not too poorly, as he says, the three baskets of the teachings of the conqueror. So here, the trainings in ethical conduct, in meditative stabilization, and in wisdom, training in the various texts of the Buddha. And he says here, then, who strives in the yogic practices, so those of the profound and the vast deeds, leading to making effort at the union of calm abiding and special insight. So it says this one who is striving, who is called Losang Drakpa, Je Lama Tsongkhapa's name, and then it says, so this is the kind of great respect that he has for the Bhagavan, this great seer or great sage.
Oh yeah, and Sila Sundu Devi, Ananjola Jamba Jambala Tena, and Sila Sundu Sumade, Sila Sundu Devi, Nanjoji, Dindi Yang and other Pewada, Jamden Doji, Raji, Bishaja, also to Sum Si, Chani, Sayu Namdala Suana, Chani, and Sila Sundu Devi, Nanjo Gombala Tena, Dingi Kwana Quanto Pewada, or to Suana, she said, that is so Timbari, there are.
No. So here, this is also explained or taught in Je Lama Tsongkhapa's secret biography, where it explains how he made effort in the various practices, including achieving calm abiding and special insight, and the union of calm abiding and special insight based upon his own striving after these practices. So there are other texts that sort of explain how Je Lama Tsongkhapa himself came to these achievements.
아니 마가섬제 체남지장 아니 다 장고나마 동가와 전문하신 체니 아니 가서를 가 저기 손으로 되는 아니 되는 손으로 잠깐 멤버다 싸워다 자제비 아니 실라 손저지 나줘라 전바다 소와 아니 좀된 장고나마 동가와 좀 비치다를 잡아 나시 아니 저 아니 누자 남지 뒤에 막에 섬제 체 남자 아니 다 그치 수시 체네 다 담바나 말에.
No. So here, then it continues saying that I gave a rise to respect in this way for the Buddha, the Bhagavan, this great seer. And it continues with you, mother sentient beings, should follow after me, should follow after this example. So in the same way that Je Lama Tsongkhapa himself gave or put effort into accomplishing these practices, he is encouraging, telling others to follow after this example and likewise engage in the various practices, enter into this path of the Buddha's teachings in the same way that he has done.
Oh yeah, tendawa tedang, ane larin dindogi yamgugi nara, ane da lamjirimba, lobzujirimba shindu chani, 신이 된존에 송대 마그 실라게 파다 안에 루브주 대다 난종 내가 냠련 대다제 탄주 최장 대신 장사로 전에 안에 두잖아 담아 송바 대당 안에 공도 그만소리 직접 지고 되는 거지 안에 내지래
So, in the same way, in the Songs of Spiritual Experience, the short Lamrim of Je Lama Tsongkhapa, it goes through the various practices, beginning with relying properly upon a virtuous spiritual friend, all the way through the union of calm abiding and special insight. And he gives this advice to those who would follow after him, saying, I, a yogi, practiced this way. You who seek liberation should do likewise. So he's encouraging those practitioners to follow after him and complete the same kind of stages that he himself went through in order to follow after the Buddha's teachings.
Oh yeah. 제랑게 때문에 다다 시바나 아니 퇴상 공심지 출라 투가데 빠도메 버추네 아니 추은디다 보시라 거비 치도 아니 현양 아니 좀 장고나마 정하고 집에 퇴상 공심 낭당데서 나와 나시 전에 두제 남지야 대다 치비 치도 그 대다라 거비 치도 아니 토마토와 나주 테네 삼바 테네 공바 오 텐나주데 아니 장고나마 집에 또바 줘봐 또제 딜레마 세지 야 요아래 또제 딜레마 나이 또제 딜레마 잡아 이라스 티오데라 타마니 된군도 냐소 량냠소 남바라 군자 담바 제비 치도 오소하여와라 어디 타마니 된군도 냠소 남베 추 도주바 점 아니 냠구지 카가네 셰소
So then here, this verse 53, where he's saying, encouraging others to practice after in the same way. This comes to the same point as the lines that occur in the Songs of Spiritual Experience, where he's encouraging others to follow after this same path. And then here it continues saying that, so in order to get others to follow after the way that Je Lama Tsongkhapa himself practiced. So if one comes to see all of the essential points of the teachings, one engages first in hearing about them, then the process of reflecting on them, then meditating on them. And so in that way, having given rise to a sort of incalculable, inconceivable joy at that process, then he is encouraging others to follow after the same path. And this is explicated in his text, sometimes translated as like the fulfillment of all aims, or the fulfillment of realizations, where Je Lama Tsongkhapa explicates the way that he himself first sought out a great deal of teaching, and then how he then reflected on those teachings such that they arose as personal instructions, and then how he made effort at accomplishing those teachings. And so then not only that, but he that text, the fulfillment of aims, gives sort of a brief description of the way in which he finally practiced all day and night in order to be able to accomplish these teachings. And that process is sort of expanded upon in the Songs of Spiritual Experience, where it's described in a little bit more depth. That sort of gives some commentary to the fulfillment of aims, and so that sort of explicates that or expands upon it.
Oh yeah, that's it. 아니 대위나 통마대나 배수 아니 대위나 대나 파면 아니라고 투라 아니 가서 다와 총주 다와 송총내 장 아니 좀 된데라 투모 많이 비 투모 많이 봐 개바 총주 많이 봐 미사와남 달래세더니 그 카가네 아니 디체나 아니 퇴섬지리 오서 저와 인호 시 가상特别 줘봐 채도 송아 야
So here, then, regarding the points of how to actually determine the essential points of the view, so how it is that one comes to determine the meaning of emptiness, and then having determined that meaning, how one comes to properly see that. So Je Lama Tsongkhapa, having seen that, then gives rise, how he gave rise to an uncommon kind of faith in the Buddha, the Bhagavan. And in order to then explain these points, clarify them well for others. This is all laid out here in this in praise of dependent origination, where he goes through sort of how one completes the path of hearing, reflecting, and meditating. So this is explained that then this poem in praise of dependent origination goes into more detail about how he gave rise to this kind of uncommon faith based upon seeing the particular points of the view, and how then he engaged in the training of hearing, reflecting, and meditating to complete all of the points of the path.
Oh yeah, that didn't. That just don't be true to go on what that. Our temper and butcher never do but one Japanese. Judo Gava, and it just Zamba Gava Watella. That the Balana may be Tambata, Java in the Lametri, but Gavatian, draw money by seeing it and bets and be Juno. Pentati, Tamban Sibita, and all longer number me, she tempting us wishing at Tambala, Eugenia Batato Kawaso. Then a Jimmy, 10 years as ever, to be Lusantia, what I'm the Luna Sajatato Zamba. Kajitama, you remember Jambacho, Kajitama, you remember Jambacho, the car, you remember show. Teacher, Jambacho, the government, the Madesia said, Jambacho, the government, Tangashi number Japan, and our show, yeah. Dynama, the teacher to me to do that. I'm going to show you a tambo to sugar. Show you a tambo nation. Tomalana may be done by the Java than the Lamitin, but Gavadia and draw money by senior tablet to be zero more, say a dig. Draw Tamja, and it had be Jumo. Tabala, Casore, Tabu Jumo, Sanja Tambala Joyatin Bari. Sanja Tambala, Juayan, Jumo. And it number in Bochetan Javi, Guru, and a lemon Jesus about members. Draw Tamje, Sholoka Tambodi, draw Simjan Tamje, and a Tabe Jumo, Sanja Gilundo, Gitambar in Bochetan Javi, and all then tended Gula. Danger somebody in Gavati, and it should be our draw Tamje, and a Lundo Gitambar in Bochetan Javaki, and a Gurchuachi, and I saw Chikana, and Nova, Kangoa, Kandungoa, Kangungoa. Oh, we will call some Rashim about Tobicone, and it has Tambongo Zabatiche.
So then it turns to the dedication, and here the dedication comes in the rest of the verses through the 58th, really. But here it begins with first verse 54, which says, "Since it is due to my teacher's kindness, I have met with the teaching of the unexcelled teacher. I dedicate this virtue too towards the cause for all beings to be sustained by sublime spiritual mentors." So here, Je Lama Tsongkhapa is dedicating the merit of having composed this text towards all sentient beings being able to meet with the teaching. So first, he dedicates in order that the precious teachings might remain for a long time, and also that, so here in the first verse of the dedication, he is recognizing that the teachings, the precious teachings, are the entryway for those wishing for liberation. They're the way that sentient beings are able to proceed to liberation. And so because meeting with a virtuous spiritual friend is how one then is able to take up these teachings, he makes this prayer, makes a dedication that all sentient beings may meet with qualified teachers, may be cared for by or sustained by sublime spiritual mentors, as it says here. And in making this dedication, he's also doing so in a way that recognizes the emptiness of the three spheres. So recognizing that the dedication so made is empty of intrinsic existence, as well as the one making the dedication and the thing being dedicated. These are all empty of intrinsic existence. existence. And so one makes a dedication with that kind of recognition that each of these lacks intrinsic existence.
Oh yeah, that did teach Tambo teacher. That teacher you was it. And Penza Chuchi, Dambang, City Par, Nando Lungan number Miosin. Dambang on Sushin, Dumbala, Yisinia, Patato, Kawa Shaw, so I think about it. Draw or draw like you do Pemba Zabi, Penza Chuchi, Dambayang, or Jumden Day, Castle, draw like you do Pemba Zabi, and then Javel Doji Damba. Penza Tea, Dambayang, Nando Lungan number Miosin, Sigala, and Tondoda, Undela Sovagi, Anne Tobangabaki, I will bear Namdo Eva Majua. Penton Chichi, Tempa Sibetang, Adolunga, number Namadoya Eva Majua. Dembang to Shene, Dambala, said, and Gavel Lundoji Demba. Or do we Bobby Damba down, and then Castle Lunga Damba in water. Or Tendaki, and then Lunga Damba Tendaki, Castle, Tendashi, then being on to Shene, and then being on to Shene, Dambala said, and it jumped in the Lunga Damba Tama Meba. Only bear Tama Sumki, never Meba. Chama maybe never in that Dembing Association at Dembalaya, and Yisinia Bastato Kamasho, September Yisinia Baki, Roa, or Jim Dennis Kansum Batella, and Chamasum never Meba. Kasungama Shuan, I say, Kalanda Tojimo, when the Tata Java Rizaba, Kandi Sama, New Digi, Tamja Rizab, Manino, Chene, so on, I say, Chene, or that. In a routine model, but Dembala, a Tamara Chuba Yinzang, then being on to Shin, Dembala, is it Yebe, and it, oh, Tato Kamasho said, Demba Chitin, but it.
So here, then the next verse reads, "May the teaching of this beneficent one till world's end be unshaken by the winds of evil thoughts. May it always be filled with those who find conviction in the teacher by understanding the teaching's true nature." So here, Jelama Tsongkhapa is making a prayer or dedication that the teachings may remain within the world, and that they may be, as it says here, unshaken by the winds of evil thoughts. So here it is making a prayer or a dedication for the continuation of the teachings, the teachings of scriptures and realizations, and in such a way that they are unmoved or untainted by wrong views, the kind of views that would reify some sort of existence that isn't there, or deprecate the existence, the things that do exist, that wouldn't be tainted by any sort of wrong views. So when one has come to find a certainty that the teacher is faultless, that the teacher is a valid being, then one comes to establish that those teachings are also faultless. They are valid teachings. They're not damaged by any sort of valid cognition. So here, when one has established that the explanations given by the teacher, one has a kind of certainty in those explanations, then one will carry out the practices, the trying to accomplish those teachings as they were taught by the teacher. So here it says, in the commentary, it says then, as for the second verse, having well understood the way in which the teacher is faultless, then he makes this prayer that those who uphold the teachings by accomplishing in accordance with the speech of the teacher may fill the world, that the world may be filled with those who have found a proper kind of ascertainment of the teachings and then are accomplishing them in accordance with the teachings of the Buddha.
Oh yeah, that they didn't do it. But Jimmy to labor shen, Jimmy Gashin to Juby, then and a sudden count member. Oh, so that Sushi Jabba the turn she to Chevare. Number Yamje down, your Jede, that you should another. 정도 다 군대 안도困难也啦 tenpa zinji ni yang tabi toba jibi shedu la ra le ba se o yang taba tenpa yang taba wani o chamen de ba me ba so tenpa zinji ni yang tabi toba jibi shedu la ra le be chi de se da nyamje de ani yo ji am de ngan do yin ba de da yin yi ge zhe zai wen na le sun a de 就这个了，多把几天没你什么就行是，俺那准备的两个人带呢，俺那嘛，我把现在就行呢，俺那其实什么呢？我呢，准备这个等把结束这个录入也是了说，俺那我嘛，开始等把这边认真，俺那嘛。 下巴去吧那是吧？对吧？今天没的时候，俺就就怕去下巴那是哦，就怕去下巴那。俺那等今天的是等不给，俺那太困难了，等把羊打把马装哇，俺那让个去啊也是，俺那今天的是等把俺多那么就等把的住宿是，俺多那么就等把的住，今天的是其他等把那些，俺那군대 당，俺那转到了说话给关呢，俺那转。 도도바당 군대 위권에 아니 좀 된데 담바 멍안도 그 도바 대다게 아니 좀 된데 담바데 주소写送 받다로
No. So here again, it says that having seen well the way in which the teacher is faultless, then he makes this prayer for those who uphold the teachings, accomplishing in accordance with the speech of the teacher, to fill the earth. And so here, this verse has a very important meaning here, because the sort of carrying on of the teachings of Scripture and realizations depends upon not being sort of influenced by negative views or wrong views. And so here, the decline of the teachings and that which causes them to sort of degenerate is only wrong views, is only wrong thoughts. That is what degenerates the teaching. So these wrong views of deprecating existence or reifying some kind of existence, exaggerating or denying, those sorts of wrong views are what cause the teachings to decline. And so here it says, then as for holding the teachings, this depends upon someone having given rise to proper thoughts, thinking through this properly, and accomplishing, and then giving sort of doing the accomplishments of those teachings, striving after the explanations and accomplishments of that. And so if you have an improper understanding, then this will sort of taint the teachings. So here, from Vasubandhu's Compendium of Higher Knowledge, he explains this here, where he says that when sort of the Buddha has already passed from the world, so when the eyes of the worldly are sort of closed to the teacher is no longer there, and then those who are like witnesses to the teachings are for the most part gone or extinguished. So like Nagarjuna and the spiritual sons who have properly understood and uphold the teachings of the Buddha, then not seeing that very thing, so not seeing the actual meaning of the teachings anymore, they sort of become obsessed with their own ideas, and these individuals will then, due to the power of their wrong thoughts, their wrong views, then confuse or sort of mess up these teachings of the Buddha. So here, by the decline of the teachings is really the decline in those who understand the teachings and who are polluting it with wrong views.
Oh yeah. 다 되게 담바 진진이 양다베 또바 개베세 담바 점바 쳐바니 아니 다 가서 니와 주대 담바 점바 쳐바니 다 좀 된데 아니 담바는 이야 바데 저라서 와나 담비 탐제 남녀들 런다 또베 산이데 대지 쳐바 마셔바 두바 쳐바 담바 오스 오다 룽게 담바 퇴섬지 때라 팝 어찌마세 가나 담비 산이 룽다 또베 대지 쳐바 마셔바 랑게 퇴섬지 때라 진 아니 대랑도 지내는 현라 치지 말로 담바데 퇴삼지 때는 봐. 퇴삼지 때는 바비 퇴 아니 냠수 렘바데 또비 잡아데 라와스미 냠수 렘바데 아니 가소리 눈디네 숨라 천년체 위 퇴도 곰네 아니랑 거지 라와스미 또바제 두바체바데 아니 또비 땜바 세가나 눈도지 땜바 아니 timbitent deembare 야
So here it's saying then that the first thing is established, and so what here it is referring to is that what causes the teachings to decline and to waver is only wrong sort of thoughts. And then there is the quotation from Vasubandhu talking about this, that if there are no longer sort of beings who are upholding these teachings, who don't see this properly, due to their wrong thoughts, they will confuse the teachings. And then the second is established, talking about that the teachings depend upon practitioners who understand the explanations and are accomplishing those. So the holding of the teachings or carrying on of the teachings, and again, the teachings are divided into those of scripture and realizations. So here, again, quoting from Vasubandhu, it establishes this second point, saying that the holy dharma of the teacher has two aspects, those of scripture and those of realizations. And so holding on to those or carrying those on is only in those who teach them and accomplish them. So here, the sort of scriptural teachings are carried on or are held by individuals hearing them and studying them, thinking about them. And so that is the way in which one comes to carry on the teachings of the scripture. And then based upon having that understanding, having heard and reflected on those teachings, one then meditates on them, puts them into practice, and based upon one's own practice gains realizations of those teachings. And so it is, this is the process of holding on to the teachings or carrying on the teachings, is first having this understanding, so having heard and reflected on the meanings of the scriptures that carries on the scriptural teachings, and then based upon one's own accomplishment, having put those teachings into practice, that the teachings of realizations are carried on. And so this is what Vasubandhu is expressing here in the second quotation.
Oh yeah, that didn't teach la. And the teacher somebody. Karo tene shumi tini sa zebe. Tubi lusan jewa tamjedo. Lulan so tang ne zimba la. Gazi zama heba manju chi se de ta tepen bare. Oni tene shumi tini sa zeba. Ta kasan koma na shi sun juwa na shi jene. Tenjun tongba tang. 안 동바 땡중고 텐도 송비와 땡내춤이 아니 요 태권하니 땡내춤이 ten이 사제바 사와제바게 아니 오 가소래 좀 된대지 광바 루루야 사지 아니 땡나 봐봐 ten이 아니 리당 쏘라 맞아봐 토요일산 개원에 개와 탐제도 아니 리당 쏘라 맞아봐 토요일산 개와 리당 쏘라 쏘장 땅에 증발라스 리당 쏘장 땅에 증발라 나디라 쏘라 미다바 손데 다들 리당 쏘장 땅에 증발라 다 쏘라 미다바 쏘장 땅에 증발라 아니 뒤에까지 자면 아니 해봐만 좋아 아니 quando ne dende de basa tombe que va de o ti member.
So then the next of the verses of this dedication then, and this comes in verse 56, it says, "May I never falter, even for an instant, to uphold the excellent way of the sage, which illuminates the principle of dependent origination, through all my births, even giving away my body and life." So here, recognizing the importance of this teaching of dependent origination that the Buddha taught taught dependent origination as emptiness and emptiness as dependent origination. And these teachings were carried on by Nagarjuna and his spiritual sons. And so this excellent way of the sage has been passed down through these proper sort of masters. And here he is making a kind of prayer that may the virtue from having composed this text, as well as in all of his other activities. He says, may I never falter even for an instant to uphold the excellent way of the sage. So with all of his body, speech, and mind, he's making this prayer to uphold the teachings of the Buddha, as well as doing so, saying whatever cost may come, even having to give away body and life, he's willing to work to uphold these teachings of the Buddha that properly reflect the intention of the Buddha. So he makes this prayer that may he not even waver from this intention, even for a moment, of wishing to uphold these teachings, and may the virtue of this composition go towards that as well.
Oh yeah, that's 아니 가르레에서는 사상탑에 수지 전반나 창다 안배 지된 정화다 렌데나 볼라서 수매장 이오메 바다도 초치쇼 세대 대인바라 합이 삼바 삼주 부순 삼바던 저 부순 소화 아니 탑시 창주기 셈당 인제당 아니 셰라라 소와 좋아 아니 돈이도 배 셰라라 소와 어디 사상탑에 삼주 부순 소가 끝나랑데 아니 사상탑에 수지 전반나 아니 다들 땡데 바디 아니 덤바라 땡주스 묘고네 아니 가소래 덤바자바기 아니 수라 아니 전반나 사상탑에 수지 전반나 창다 안비 지대 좀 받다지 냠슬렘바라 마잖아 랭겐돌라잖아 자기와래 지기와래 냠슬렘바라 어지 창다 안비 지대 좀 창바단 자진라 소와 그라랑 그 지대 좀 나신 아니 렌데나보 방 이시조 공부 차주바 렌데 나보라서 수매장 아니 텐더위 아니 삼조 넘버 타바게 아니 다 가소래 수마 대다기 아니 초체바면 봐 수마 체발 제제다 대단 주발라 아니 초체바면 봐 아니 왜 가지 파체세와기 튕젠당 가지 파체세와기 아니 초체바면 봐 tim바래
No. So, then the next two verses, actually, the final two, say, may I spend day and night carefully reflecting, by what means can I enhance this teaching achieved by the Supreme Savior through strenuous efforts over countless eons? And then it goes into 58, saying, as I strive in this with pure intention, may Brahma, Indra, and the world's guardians and protectors such as Mahakala unswervingly always assist me. So here he's making sort of strenuous efforts, striving to achieve these teachings with this kind of excellent motivation, with a motivation of bodhicitta and great compassion, and striving in trying to realize emptiness, to come to this wisdom realizing emptiness. And so he says then, with this sort of pure intention that he is making, again, a prayer to uphold the teachings of the Buddha, wondering by what means, through his own practice, can he strive to uphold and keep these teachings going. And he says then that he's striving with pure intention to uphold these teachings, however he may be able to. And with that intention then, with this goal of upholding the teachings, he makes a prayer to have the sort of unwavering help of particular protector kind of deities that will be able to assist him in that sort of noble aim.
Oh yeah, tadi 제자 삼아도 거와 침보래 손도 거와 체대 콜라션 거와양 체대 시진인도래 지시도 잠불림비 매남 셔러지 바로도 침바 대세도 아니 양다버 조의 산제장 누바 민주라세 셔러지 바로 침바라 동바된 중국에 땡중 동부된 또버기다 셔러지 바로를 침바한테 야 바로를 침바잖아다야 마신도 콤데 셔러지 바로를 침바라 저바 대세도 안에 산제 양다버 조의 산제장 누바 민주라세 담비 최장 유人도 내신 아니 최진박이 아니 군대 군조자 지대도 중화교로 군조선과 중화교로 시선소 야대부주다.
So then here, these final verses are sort of easy to understand the meaning, but there is a great purpose here in expressing them. And so from the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, it says here then that as long as beings are striving in this world to practice the perfection of wisdom, as long as there are those who are making effort or who are putting their deeds into the perfection of wisdom, then so long will the perfect Buddhas not sort of set, not go away within the world, and for so long will the holy Dharma remain as well, and the precious Sangha jewel will also arise within the world. So for as long as there are those practicing, putting their effort into the perfection of wisdom, coming to understand properly emptiness as dependent origination and dependent origination as emptiness, then for that long the perfect, complete Buddhas will not set within the world, and the Dharma will remain, and as well the Sangha jewel will be in the world.
Oh yeah. 길이다든다 사상답에 소리 좀 많아 상상한 배지된 좀 와다 렌덴은 취재 대당 아니 라브링 면지 대내는 좀 배라 촌이니 카다량 바 같이 싸워도 세야 대당 반잖아 제요아리 면지디 장주 남지르고 지금 말람단잖아 말람다 현잖아 셰도 예매 마음에 지나 마샤 샤고 소아다 배나 측타마데라 지타마데라 안에 가서 남산주비 텐전주지 가신세시 미담 메모기 체라군도 제왕아마 남다 란단타와 만주지 세대 어디디 딜하소와 텐전주지 가신세제 미담 메모기 세대 다 수마체바잖아 소체바면 바tim바레 광도 샤바게 남산주비 튕겐세지 가진세지 매당 명명그 체라군도 남다 랑다 저와 만주지 세대당 대대디레 사산다가 추디 좀 만나지 차창다 안비 지된 경화다 렌덴 라보라서 숨에자 이와면 받다도 조제쇼 세대 매전도 신나 직접 탐안이고 도시아요
So this final verse where he says, as I strive in this with pure intention, may Brahma, Indra, and the world's guardians and protectors such as Mahakala unswervingly always assist me. And here, this is similar to in the final Lamrim prayer. The same kind of sentiment is expressed in the verse where he says, as for all the people and beings not human who prevent bad conditions and make things conducive for unhindered practice of the excellent path, may they never be parted for all their lifetimes from the purest path which the Buddhas praise. And it continues into so saying that these sort of special protectors, may they remove prevent those conditions which are not conducive to practice, those sort of adverse conditions, and also may they help to provide the kind of conducive conditions that allow people to practice this path and never be separated from it in all of their lifetimes. So these prayers are making the same kind of intention.
Oh yeah, that day. Then you want Jajane, and it does Shumaja, the one. The Nagapa, 자장이 좀된 지대지 만주 다시 전부写完了 나가 발로写完 파데 사티 지제디 바라데 가이나 팀도 다 잡아들려 있지
이거를 네.
누구야?
누.
잡아들려 막 어디서 발로 시 파데 대단 아니 콜라오 스타일이 대대대시 잡쇼 말하더라.
So then there is finally the colophon of the text. We don't really need to go through this. If you have the booklet with the Thupten Jinpa translation, this is there if you want to read it. That basically, saying who wrote this, Lobsang Drakpa, and then it even includes the name of the scribe and so forth. So that's easy to understand.
Oh yeah, that is 아니. 치기된 샤바되고 아니 좋아체 와 대다 때밤에도 좋아지 치기된 전점 치기된다고 아니 샤신도 다디기 제가 최대 중세 샤바데마다 관심 쉬어를 사슴바 최대 샤바니 원한 제라마 동바된 중그 전도 시네 덤밤 라나메 바라 아바 제주 대다예나 단이 동바된 중그 전도 통주 간절해 통주당 개라다나 단이 직자도 세주 걔네 안에 덤바 참매기고 통주소 도디시 아니 저바 치시잖아 저바 차대 야
So that then finishes the sort of explanation of the meaning of the words of this marvelous praise that was made like that. So that is the end of that explanation. And then it turns to the sort of expanded, a little bit of an explanation of the expanded meaning. So it says, however, as for how Je Lama Tsongkhapa came to see emptiness as the meaning of dependent origination, and then praise the unsurpassed teacher like that. So someone might have a few more questions regarding this. And so it says now, well, can you again look at the way in which one comes to see the meaning of dependent origination as emptiness, and how it is that in reliance upon that understanding, one is simultaneously able to eliminate both extremes, and then based upon that, and then how one sees the teacher as being a valid being, how one comes to that kind of understanding. So if someone were to ask, can you explain those points in brief? He says, I will explain them.
Oh yeah, that is like the Lamji do a young Shabada, Captain Shaba Nietzsche. 다 담보라 대란 다 레스 되게 가사기 다 라니 대화 대화 그러와 내 타바 대화 아르마 아니 라니 대화 대화 다 레스 되게 가사기 토만 대화 주바다 동아세에 탐니 다 대화 대화다 동아 대화 란자서 예바 인장 아니 대화 되게나 아니 대화 두거와다 동아 메데나 아니 동아지 세거와 인장 다 되게 탑대 가래래서나 아니 가서래 대화되나 아니 되게 주게와 주게다 동아 메데나 아니 동아지 뒤 대범 미게와 방고와에 그디게 랑도 레 아니 텔레션도 타요 요 말에서 텔레션도 마도네 아니 게디길 안도라 때네 게디길 안도 가르에서나 아니 미기주 빵 그와 주네 미기주 본거 추주 송니 텐라위 아니 랑도라 때네 아니 가장 고주시와 나시 원도 주제 그 주대 추든지 말에 원디 주니 수림 내세매 저는 엄마 주바라 소하나시 원디 대화 주바 채도
So then here, this explanation is going to be broken down into two basic points. So the first is just sort of a brief explanation of the condensed points of the general path, and then an explanation of the meaning of this occasion, so as it applies to this particular text. So here, as for a little bit of a brief exposition of some of the stages of the path, of the general path, path. It then says, so if for a being who wishes good for themselves, so we all naturally have a desire to be happy and a desire to avoid suffering, but in order to actually accomplish that, we need to figure out a method for accomplishing our happiness and removing our suffering. So at the beginning, someone who is wishing good for themselves, and we all naturally have this wish to be happy, you have to find a kind of method for accomplishing your happiness and a method for removing your suffering. So when you ask, well, what is that method? Then other than taking up virtues and abandoning non-virtues, there's no other method to accomplish our happiness. So here, as it says then, there is no other way. So for a being who is seeking after their happiness, there is no other way than gaining certainty in the points of what it is that we should adopt and what we should abandon. So one needs to come to recognize that the non-virtuous actions will lead to suffering and virtuous actions will lead to happiness. So one needs to abandon the 10 non-virtues and strive after accomplishing the 10 virtuous actions, so guarding one's ethics and so forth. As it says in the Entry to the Middle Way by Chandrakirti, that other than ethics, there is no way to get to a higher rebirth. So here, if we want to accomplish the happiness of gaining a good rebirth, one has to rely upon accomplishing virtue and abandoning non-virtue.
Oh yeah, ondo dewa druba chedo ondo kandesu druore sana ane tata kasore meguchu bongi one nganju dunga sane ane nganju jeje ke du meguchu bongi suru suya tang 대라야 아니 가서 군조섬라 자수 주베 잠들었다 아니 랜데지 랑도 수신도 주발라 때네 아니 제와 치마 온들이 이제 차파제지 도와 타쳐야 말해 당원이 제와 치마 온들이 이제 토바지 이나야 세상도 태양 아니 다 가서를 량유지 왕거 중에 풍부지 내단이 뭔가 샤완도 주에 풍부 고지 주제 태양 제제 태양 내단이 뭔가 왕거 인장 온도 태양 아니 다 나는 그냥 가서 아니 다 이미 거의 예미다 아니 가서래 동안 망보 숨바나시 양도 돌아가 왔다 양도 제와 양도 또连续 왕그라라 라메바인데 줄련이 마세 봐도 아니连续 왕그 제와 대야 모두 바인다 양도 돌아가 왔다 아니 이게 매바다 당연히요 매발라 소바게 아니 코치 이모 요 코치 동안出去와 망해봐다 망해봐다 이제 이거 망해봐다 믿어봐 소지 동안 코치 동안다 코치 동안지 코 믿어봐 소소 코치 동안다 아니 소소 동안라 소와게 안에서 가서래 동아지 라신도 렌 통해서 되나 가서래 사실 니는 이 풍부들이 시제라 아니 동아제라 하시란 말이야 봐. 야.
So here it says then, in order to accomplish a good rebirth in the future, one has to then think about the suffering of the lower realms, think about the ability of the triple jewel to protect you from that, based upon having an understanding of karma, what it is that you should accomplish and what it is that you need to avoid or abandon. Then one is guaranteed to get a good rebirth. If you act ethically, if you act in accordance with this advice, having taken refuge and seen the sufferings of the lower realms and so forth, one is then able to gain a higher rebirth in the future. But although one may gain a good rebirth in the future, it continues saying that, well, one has to cast off that good rebirth again and again. So here then one turns to the kind of contemplations, recognizing that so long as one is taking up contaminated aggregates due to the force of karma and afflictions, then one is going to have to experience all various types of suffering. So long as one is sort of other controlled, under the power of karma and one's afflictions, then you will have to experience suffering, no matter what sort of birth that you take. So when you're in that situation of not having any sort of autonomy, having to cycle through samsara, this situation has many different types of suffering. Some are listed here, including the fact that it's uncertain. Samsara is uncertain and it's unreliable. There's nothing that we can rely on within samsara. We have to cast off our body again and again, and so forth. There are the sort of 6 types of suffering, the 8 types of suffering. They're listed in many different ways. One can think of the general types of sufferings of samsara, as well as the sufferings of individual types of beings. But based upon thinking about that type of suffering, the fact that from the moment we take up the contaminated aggregates due to the force of karma and afflictions, we aren't beyond the nature of suffering. So one comes to see that samsara has this suffering nature and wishes to get out of that situation.
Oh yeah, that dungaji rangshin to tong ne, an tenda ane dunga teta la tabala, tarba sene ane dunga kasore, dunga la sumye benane, dungaji dunga gyu dunga chawan duji dunga sede, oda tina ne dunga ne bang kasho. 내가 치쇼데 안에 차와두지 동아진 바래 어 현재 차와두지 동아 텔레 탈바 되바나 차와두지 그 동아 녀월에 시위니시 타바 되밤 안에 동아들 타바 되바나 안에 다 동아 탐제게 스비 동아 꾸지 잡아대 강인세 동아 그 중국 잡아대 가래래서나 안에 강이 차와 쳐서 다 가상 가지고 얘가 지天그바 치면 뭐 대이 잡아 말을 때서 가스단에 되바 봐 강인바지 소와 채소서 뒤에서나 좀 된데 스비 자와 마르바 통에 마르바데 안에 다 동아탐제 그 자와인 봐.
So then seeing that samsara is in the nature of suffering, one then seeks out, well, if you want to get out of that suffering situation, then one needs to search out, well, what is the root of all of this suffering of samsara? And among the types of suffering that we experience within samsara, the suffering of change, and the pervasive suffering of conditioned existence, it's this third type, this pervasive suffering of conditioned existence, that is most difficult for us to overcome, but that is what we need to have a desire to abandon, to really give rise to a genuine wish for the freedom from samsara. So having gained this sort of this certainty that one wishes to be free from this suffering situation, one then needs to search out and try to find, well, what is this cause of samsara, the cause of the situation that I am in? So then at that time, it said, so having seen that the Buddha taught that ignorance is the root of samsara, then one begins to investigate, takes up the investigation of what is this ignorance and how is the object of that ignorance, how is ignorance grasping at its object incorrectly.
Oh yeah, Mariba Sumba Tone, and a Maribadang, and a Maribagi. 아니 진주 아니 고랑 그 진단가 뭐 키샤유 로이 진주 치다 yin 아니 수체도 접아쳐봐 그러와 접아쳐와나 그냥 마르바기 샤유 마르바디 샤유 메바 마르바디 진주의 가래래 산하더니 리비 미디 초지 당 리바이 시 간다 미디 초스 좋아 리바 이시 간다 미디 초스 좋아데 마르바스 좋아 대나 마르바데 샤유 메비 로시에서 가나 샤유 리바 이시 간다스 가나 리바세 그래 마르바기 샤유 메바 좋아 마르바기 샤유의 가래에서나 아니 라신지 주바쯤 봐 나도 주바쯤 봐 현유 다도 주바데 요 마레데 현유 다도 메바데 아니 여바 다도 주바 준비 아니 로셰수 로셰 인상 아니 덴지즈 보니스 통화나 태양 아니 년보다 차나 아니 보니 봐 년보다 제대로 가라 년보 권에 공도 패디 가라 아니 가소래 대당전의 숙출을 치를 타라 단전 삼바 차비를 자야야야 패디 가라 아니 장외에서 체중의 치 타라 장외를 자 세바 나지 전에 아니 로시도 보니스 통화나 아니 타바다 탐제켜봐 텐도니 권에서 아니 텐다위 차와 되지 그 동안 여와라시고 니시삼 텐도니게 야 여와당 아니야 니 십태마인 바다 탐제셔봐 텐도니 권에 아니 저게 숨차 그래
이네 현유 매배 록셰
현유 매비 록셰세 현유 요 말아 현유의 가르에서 그 다도 주바도 그 현배 유들에 다도 주바도
현유 유반낭신 록셰르로
말에 현유 매바 그 현유 매비세 로코랑의 현유 매비 현유의 타녀도 매바
No, 하고
다도 주바 타녀도 요 말아
네.
야야
So then here, if so, one having seen that the Buddha has taught that ignorance is the root of samsara, then one takes up the investigation of what is that ignorance and how does it grasp at its object. What is the way in which this ignorance conceives things to exist or grasps at them as though though they exist in a certain way. So here, this ignorance. Grasping at some kind of true existence, grasping at things as though they had intrinsic existence or were existent as a self. This is the opposite of wisdom or awareness. And so here one comes to see, therefore, that one is able to abandon this wrong conception which grasps at the conceived object of ignorance as though it were existent that way, although it isn't really existent that way. And one comes to recognize that one is able to abandon that wrong conception, that way of grasping, that our ignorance grasps at things as though they had some kind of true existence. So here one comes to realize that if this ignorance meets with the antidote, meets with wisdom recognizing the lack of intrinsic existence, wisdom realizing emptiness, then these two are in direct opposition. So if the more that we cultivate wisdom, the stronger that our wisdom grows, the lesser this ignorance will be. These are direct opposites. So one recognizes that if one cultivates this wisdom and increases it more and more and more, one is able to eventually completely remove that ignorance, completely overcome that. And so recognizing that one has the ability to remove this wrong consciousness, then one gives rise to the mind striving after liberation or the state of omniscience in accordance with the various sort of dispositions of the different types of beings, the three different types of beings. We'll get into that. But if one is striving after one's own liberation, or whether one is striving to gain the state of omniscience, one has to first recognize that one is able to overcome this ignorance by properly cultivating the antidote.
Oh yeah. 타바다 탐제 전도님이 권해서 다 리젠 숨지라랑 그 매와 신도 남지를 받아봐 채도 세가나 년도지 리젠 되게 아니 차원도지 동아 빵와 채바라 말이바 빵고라마 아니 되네 차원도지 그 동안에 와시바 그 니시대 라니 지 라니 차원도지 그 동안 니시 영월시고 니시 점 토비 채도 아니 지보 아니 말이 받아 반지 쪼고체네 아니 대pon제 그람 담에 또베람 관발라 채발라 때네 아니 탈 아니 라니 가소레 차와 동안 누지기 동안 여와르세베 타바 톤도 년가기 아니 호텔라 냐디지르 제체 라 담 리젠 담보니 오데 반자랑 톱자를 개발요하면 아니 초사주지권에 아니 란자의 초사주지권에 개발도 봐봐 인장 다들 탄주 엄마 탄주 대바 손친저가 아니 타바탄 튼드니와 지바 쳔발라 초사주지권에 개발도 봐봐더라 아니 란자지르젠 란자지르젠 아니 다 가서로 체두샤와 섬제 탐제지 텐도 아니 니엔루스 마르바 잠바자 마세 아니 마르베 샤비 마르베 말땐 마르베 바다면 바자딜 티 바자질 레비 왕그 인한 추와당 와 시리 바자단 제와 아니 세비치도 아니 가서 탑시 순저지 랑광발라 때네 아니 탐제튼 택템바 텐도 년게기 아니다 대신지를 제숨 전에다 ram지를 두두시 말해
So then here it continues saying that each of these types, the three types of beings, will accomplish or proceed through the stages of the path in accordance with their own kind of disposition. So those who are considered to be of the type of the lineage of hearers are seeking only to accomplish their own kind of peace, a pacification of their own pervasive suffering of conditioned existence. So for hearers and the other lower vehicle practitioner, a solitary realizer, the thing that they abandon is the same. They abandon this ignorance, grasping at true existence, grasping at a self, and their attainment is the same. They gain a state of freedom or a state of peace from that their own suffering existence. They have removed the cause for there to take up contaminated aggregates and so forth. And so based on the practice of cultivating wisdom, cultivating the antidote to that ignorance, they are then able to gain a kind of solitary peace. And so the difference then between one who practices as a hearer and one who practices as a solitary realizer is in the amount of merit that they gain. So in terms of the object that they abandon, the ignorance, grasping at a self, so by realizing selflessness, they are able to abandon that ignorance. And the kind of peace that they gain is the same sort of object of attainment. But the difference between them, the reason that a solitary realizer is considered to be superior, is due to the amount of merit that they have collected. And so then, for those who are of the type of the Mahayana, they are not just striving to attain their own peace, but rather thinking about the benefit of all sentient beings with this attitude of bodhicitta. They give rise to a wish to not just abandon ignorance, but to abandon all of the predispositions, the imprints of ignorance, along with the obscurations to omniscience, such that they gain a state where they are able to be of assistance to help all sentient beings. So here, the Bodhisattva has removed not just ignorance, which is this fundamental cause, but also any lingering imprints of that ignorance and the obscurations to omniscience. So this is the way that each of the three types of beings progresses along the path in accordance with their disposition.
Oh yeah, that digi, you didn't say that got the Shabala. That Kasore, Tawa Tatu, Tanju, Tawala, ya, Chiba Shabala, and the Tuda Wama Soso Kita de Sudi, Dame de Sudan, and the Dame Gaja da de Sudi, Sheko, Tema Shewala, and the Yabuji Mashewala, and the Kasore. Kimda Koma, Arashi, maybe Tawato at the desert, Galakawa, Kundan Jambe and Tesunda, Kong Kase. Sometimes Ranjo be Cherabana, Dodewada, sometimes Ranjo be Chetavi Gala, Merim Shinsi, Yaramaza, Tambo Konane, Chitimbi, and Chitimbi Banzi, Sundua, Yinzang, Tokawa Yazang, Tuda Omane, Sundeta. 대주 다음에 때는 배주대 다 시대만이 때는 배주가라 다 때는 보고 있다 다음에 다 르바시도 아니 남배 주다만 와 대다 그 다음에 대주도 마 사실 거래 돼 요 주다 소소다 그 대주당 다음에 주다 도뒤 담아 오세
네 공당 기지기 양도소서
况且都身上让这比去单位干了买的么些的也是马在谈不扩大呢去特别把这东西我说其他巴的让就巴的其他巴的嘛的多对巴的身上巴的让就给大瓦得到了跟着那些钱呀人把些咋个来是他马在巴的他妈让就他就大瓦了是完了能个了把它拿去咋瓦那些人是那么他多搞来送过来
So here, then, as for the explanation on this occasion, it's giving a way to come to be led to the view, led to this profound view, particularly that of the consequentialist school, which is considered to be the kind of highest of these schools. But in order to do that, to get to that kind of a view, one has to first have a good understanding, come to determine what the lower schools are positing in order to be able to understand that which is posited by the kind of higher schools. So here, this is then divided into two main sections, which is first, the way in which each of the tenant schools posits a self, and then how they are, in brief, how they establish selflessness, each of the individual tenant schools. So in order to be able to be led to progress to the consequentialist, the Prasangika view, one needs to know each of the lower tenant schools, needs to have an understanding of how they determine selflessness, how they determine existence, and so forth, in order to then be able to progress to a kind of higher view. So as the Master Gungtang has said, these lower tenant schools are like stairs leading to the final view of the Prasangikas. So in order to get there, it's not like we can just like fly up to the top. We need to go through this sort of staircase, going from the Great Exposition or Vaibhashika school, then to the Sutra school, then to the Mind-only school, then to the Middle Way Autonomy school, and finally one will arrive at the Prasangika view. But it's not possible to just skip over those. One has to progress through the various views in order to come to a proper understanding of the Prasangika.
Oh yeah, that do that. That do that. Any time do that is a society that 제전에 아니 다 소시 다 되죠 대비 다 소시 주제 나도 좀 와고 코스 숨이 배나냐 다 담보되라 나 소시 다 되죠 되라 싫어 왔는 말이 백한도 주제지 말이 바그 샤완도 주제 아니 다음에 봐라 몽바 렌데라 몽바기 아니 몽바기 샤완 텐도 주제 라비 당진 잠시 현유양 라비 당진现在大致라완 제지 동 라완 제도 추와怎么的 라비 당진是吧那下桥规矩 라비 당진지 현유양日本가바 미니비大致라완 제도 추와开了嘛嘛都大致라완 제도 추와的日本가바 미니비 왕기 아니 로바마비 춥다 바시기 시치로요 춥다 로바 가바 미니요 왕게 로바 아니 시로도 마요 춥다 바시 라냐와 이라 로바 Yeah,
so then here, the way that the individual tenant schools posit a self is then divided into the way that they individually posit a self, the sort of measure of establishment, the extent of establishment of that self so posited, and then how it is that due to the power of grasping at a self, one revolves or cycles in samsara. So of these three points, then as for the first, it says here that outsiders, non-Buddhists, are sort of like have come under the control, are slaves to their ignorance. So because they are not even able to refute even the most coarse kind of self, the conceived object of grasping at an established self, they are unable to even posit selflessness insofar as the self not being a permanent, singular, autonomous kind of entity. So because they are not able to refute a self through reasoning, they are totally deluded or ignorant with respect to karma, cause and effect. They don't accept karma and so forth. And they are unable to posit or refute a conceived object of grasping at a self, even a coarse one. They are considered to be just wrong. Like their tenet systems are simply wrong.
Oh yeah, that didn't around the check. And it took them our shiganane, and it's a Ramawakan Nante, and it's a Nama Pubin, there were Jobja Ibn and there were Nama Pubin, there and it touched Rama Gento Jubi, Dio Maris, and it should me back Dio Maris. Oh. Tamita Kanduyan Jedu Mebagi, Ranja to be Tayo Bache. And it touched Raman Jenji to think Dame Bache. Oh, this is what it does. Tirama Venajan, Nama Pue, Taji Raman Jenjita Mela. Taji Raman Jenjita Mela, Jedu Mebetayo, but Teso Tamita Kanduyan Jedu Meberanja to be Kansatao, Tamita Kanduyan Jedu Meberanja to be Jay. Kansa de Taji Raman Jenjita Mebayin, oh, Chigore. Dibe, Ranja to be Jay, Jita, them Mede Chula, that Keve Sheba Medumba. Yoares, Liberanja to be Jayito, them Midi to the Kavi Sheba Midimba Maya, Dil Midrolas, Tavikone Shende Sabanes, Ta Chibukone Nambayin, and Tavikone Shende Shabani, Dark Helamba, that Tavikone Shende Shabati, Tabar Missam days. Any number in a dark calling in a number in Chijala, Tawakata Chacha Kalang Gores. Tawakata Chacha Kasashuimba, Dujatamja Midaba, Sachatamja Dungava, Chirtamja Donshin Dameba, Yangaland there was Shiva, said Chirtamja Donshin Dameba, Kalamba Yinzang, Dame Kamalana, any number Shachokomari, Chachashim Kamalamba Yinzang, Shandi Shabati. David Guananda Kalamba is on Shandere, Seni, Shabati Tabar Misade, Tawakata Chacha Kalamba is a Dama Kalangore. Yeah.
So here then, so as far as those outsiders, they don't even accept selflessness, so they don't fall within the Buddhist schools. But among those tenant holders of our own schools, so those within the Buddhist tenant holders, there are many different ways of positing or refuting, actually, grasping at a self that are more subtle and coarse, but all of them are the same in accepting selflessness. They all assert or posit selflessness, and so are the same in that way. And there is, regarding this then, there is one sort of point of debate, because one of the internal divisions of the Great Exposition School, so there are 18 sub-schools of the Great Exposition, or the Vaibhashika school, and one of them, the Nemapu in Tibetan, but I think it's the Vatsiputriyas in Sanskrit, that they assert selflessness insofar as they assert that there is no self which is permanent, singular, and autonomous, but they do posit a self which is inexpressible or ineffable. And so here there then becomes sort of a debate among different masters, saying about the way that they either posit or do not posit this particular sub-school of the Vaibhashikas, a self which is considered to be a self-sufficient, substantial entity. So there are different scholars that posit this differently, whether or not they are accepting or are proponents of a self which is a self-sufficient, substantial entity. And so he says, then the author of our text, that he doesn't want to go too much into this, but according to what he thinks, to place these Vatsiputriyas outside of the Buddhist tenet holders is not logical. It's not right to place them outside of that, because here, as we have seen earlier, when it comes to what makes someone a Buddhist school, it is dependent upon accepting the four seals of Buddhist thought. So here, if you accept that all compounded things are impermanent, all contaminated phenomena are suffering, all phenomena are selfless, and nirvana is peace, if you accept those four propositions, then that makes you a Buddhist tenet holder. And so he is asserting here that these Vatsiputriyas, although they may espouse or be proponents of this kind of ineffable self, because they accept selflessness in terms of the selflessness of there not being a singular or permanent singular autonomous self, they still qualify as being Buddhists. Although their understanding of selflessness is more coarse rather than subtle.
Oh yeah, that thing ma do this. 现在下巴的没得把大门，现在下巴的没得把马的什么do this，太个的是。看是三年嘛不平的话的，去他们家大都开联络噻呐，去他们家大都开联络噻呐，太大了。아니 양아랜데와 시와 켈림베 내요 말스 라 내요도 세이사 말에 내면도 세이사 이게 마다 이사 로상도 대단한 양아랜데와 시와 켈림베 내요 말스 나 가르레서 양아랜데와 시와 켈림 발라 니모바당 니모바 니와 시와 긴시 켈랑 거 거든 니모바 니와 시와라 니와 시와 체베 니모 다음에 거망어도 저 그래서 니뭐 다음에 거망어도 마선바 아니 양아랜데와 시와 토바데 아니 요 토야 말이 인자 양아랜데와 시와 켈린 친제라 아니 다음에 바 켈린 거래 세야이다 대단한 양아랜데와 시와 켈린 뭐 내매도
ine nemapu to de 양엔 켈랭요레서 콘조
다도开两个人是呢，大马都去他，大都开2个人是呢，现在下巴的没得把马的是，安尼可以大都开2个人是呢，他那两个人的话，希望开2边那要马的是，两的开2呢，两的拖把的车把给拖，安尼拖把车把啦，安尼两的这个可以是呢，你没把当。你们把你把希望开，是吧？你这帮把开了我的，你这帮把开了完了，你们把你这帮过的，你这帮完了，你这给你们大面光过的，大面马光完了，人家他把这没把印章，你大面给他都开了呢，俺两个人对吧？希望开了把给那要嘛的，
So here, then there's a little bit of debate back and forth. Because he has just, the author of our text has said that he doesn't think it is logical or right to place the Vatsiputriyas in with other non-Buddhist tenet holders. But then someone responds to him saying, well, that's not established. It is right to put them with non-Buddhist tenet holders, because if they accept a self of phenomena, they accept that all phenomena have some kind of a self, and so if one accepts that, then there wouldn't be any way to posit or accept that there is peace, that nirvana is peace. Excuse me.
Oh, yeah.
So here, where it says in the Tibetan, the second line down on 67, the first word "ye," it should be "may," because here that's actually quite an important distinction. Here, in order to posit that there is some kind of nirvana, that there is freedom from our ignorance and afflictions and so forth, one has to posit that there is both a cause for being in that sort of suffering situation, and that there is an antidote to that, that by cultivating a particular antidote, you are able to overcome the afflictive emotions. Now, for all of the Buddhist schools, they would assert that this is a meditation on selflessness, that by coming to a realization of selflessness, you are able to remove the ignorance that is the cause for cycling in samsara, and therefore one can achieve peace, one can achieve nirvana. So for the Vatsiputrias, if it were the case, as this person is saying, that they accept a self of all phenomena, then that would be, you wouldn't have a meditation on selflessness that would then be able to act as an antidote to the afflictive emotions, and therefore there would be no way or no sort of place for them to accept that nirvana is peace.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that young lady was she was killing me, name by Termasa. Jedu maybe, and Tammy the Kanduang, Jedu be, and that to get Pumbolang, Tadana. Ani tembe dame sumba danga she ani shebeja ani dame kasore dame kele ba de jure jerang phombolang ngo thade be ani kasore ngo thadena ani tembe dame ba sumba da ga lo she shebeja ani temba dame sumba da ga we ge ani so kasore tawa damba yiza tijang ani dame kele ba de jure
No. So not only that, not only is it the case that if they are accepting of some kind of self of all phenomena, then there wouldn't be a way for them to accept nirvana as peace, but on the occasion of establishing that there is this self which is unexpressible or ineffable, they are essentially asserting a self which is of a different essence or nature from the aggregates. And so if that is what they are asserting, as this person is saying, then that would contradict the teachings of the Buddha on selflessness. And so if you explain it in that way, that this asserting a self which is of a different essence or nature from the aggregates is going to contradict the Buddha's teaching of selflessness, then you would have to say, following that conclusion, that this particular sub-school then does not accept selflessness in the way that it was taught by the Buddha, because they are proponents of some kind of ineffable self which is established as a different entity from the aggregates.
Oh, yeah. That didn't you know, Dame Kelly, that's it. I want you to talk about Dame Kelly. Dame Kelly, Raja to be a good Dame, but the Kelly, but never pork. That Chenduni Raja to be a good Dame, Raja to be a good Dame, Dujanum, and Ranzin be Toby Shanshi, and the Ranzan Chua. Tomorrow, but the region on the Chuba Shanshi. Do much Hanam, Ranzan Toby Shanshi, and the Rangan Nedrich Chuba town. And that Casore, $20 to go at it, Shanshi Rangan Chuba. Do they chame Sabi Rabba? Chiden there. Do they Kazashuana say, do they chame Saba Giraba Chiden down? Tezimbi, do they chame Sabi Rabba Tedang? Tambo by Tamchi do they chame to Tenesani Sasagara, and a do Rabba to Su, Tenraway, and a do they chame Sabi Rabba de Chiden down. They use Chiden. Tezimbi Sama Zashan to Chubati Church that to Chubatawa. Zashan to Chubatato, Church that. 三藏白多比显示然后呢出巴当去年出巴所买讲我的这个去的等个钱是吧觉得三藏白大多比显示然后呢出巴当从那全家都出国的显示然后呢出巴当去年说是出巴要买的去了天没把钱人家他希望的用住你我的安尼点把出巴到把大上嘛一把土毛嘛一把对了就那出巴当顶住堂让给参与去出巴赢呀都单的做的要么我生命我都
So here, then, as far as this sub-school of the Vaibhashikas, or the Great Exposition School, the Vatsiputriyas, they accept selflessness insofar as they accept the lack of a permanent, unitary, autonomous self, although it is the case that well, they may or may not, but according to some scholars, but that they do accept a self which is a self-sufficient, substantial entity. So they accept selflessness on one level, but are proponents of another kind of type of self. And then as far as the two, the Vaibhashikas and the Sutra school, they accept selflessness that is the selflessness of a self which is a self-sufficient, substantial entity. So the lack of a self, which is a self-sufficient, substantial entity, is the kind of selflessness that both the Sutra school and the Vaibhashikas, or the Great Exposition school, accept. And so for them, they also say that for compounded phenomena, they are established by means of their own characteristics on the basis on their basis of designation, on the basis of conceptually designating them, and all that uncompounded things then are established as existing, like the sort of measure of their existence is existing on the basis grasped at by thought. So here, this is how they propound existence. All compounded things are then said to exist by means of their own characteristics on the basis of designation by thought, and uncompounded things as well. The extent of their establishment is the point to which they exist on the basis of designation. And then they also assert external objects as being the aggregation of partless particles. So we had talked about this earlier, on the basis of the collection or aggregation of partless particles coming together, you have gross objects, external objects and forms and so forth. And they also assert that the valid cognition, which grasps at an external object, is established as being a different substance or substantial entity from the thing that it grasps. So here then, turning to the mind-only school, the mind-only school does not accept that phenomena are established from their own side on the basis of designation, or the basis of conceptually designating them, and they do not accept the establishment of external objects, but they do say that I think that's all he went through there.
就是说
先往地
先往是哪可的是
第七den du jubat såg med kan kapashayores. He did. Okay. Sorry. So, and then here, it continues saying that, so although the mind-only school does not assert the existence of external objects, they do say that the other-powered nature and thoroughly established nature, those two are truly established and are established by means of their own characteristics, although those imputed natures natures are not established by means of their own characteristics or truly established. They assert that imputed natures are established from their own side.
再下去。
No. So we'll stop there.
Yeah.